Hi guys, Rubidiri Victor here, multimedia artist, president of the Artists Coalition of Trinidad and Tobago. It's 2025 and the world as we know it is tottering. Trinidad and Tobago's socioeconomic fortunes precariously poised. The National Budget 2025-2026 needed to show innovation, shift the status quo, and focus on new economies with a renewed focus on people. The creative industries, cultural sector, we sent in a set of submissions to the Prime Minister, to line ministers, to give the budget an engine like that's transformative. These initiatives could and still can have the most widespread impact, feel-good impacts on the broad population and many niche communities. The creative industry spends they're relatively low risk and they're high yield when designed and programmed properly, and culture, of course, remains the comparative advantage of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean at large. So this is the creative sector reaction to Budget 2026. So, okay, right. So here's the thing. First off, I would have to say and admit that in many respects, Budget 2026 is one of the most progressive budgets in recent memory. In its gestures towards the green economy, agriculture, dealing with marginalized groups like the differently abled, the working class, prospective young homeowners, young families, etc. It deals with several macroeconomic issues that have been at crisis, the NIB crisis, National Insurance Board. It repairs that the financial institution profiteering. There's an asset levy on the banks and insurance companies. And the entire budget aims to tax the wealthy. So it's taking money from the ruling classes, the owning classes, and that kind of stuff, and redistributing it in a number of different programs and those kinds of things, which aim to kind of democratize the wealth and stir up and start up new economies and new industries and those things, and reduce the food import bill. So it's also it creates a number of different regulatory and oversight institutions overlooking different parts of industry and those kinds of things. So, all in all, it's a lot of different things that seem to be moving in the right direction. This is the thing though, despite a lot of those innovations and a lot of that kind of acumen in those parts of things, as far as the creative industries and the cultural sector goes, it is clear that it is still a blind spot with Trinidad and Tobago politicians and our technocrats. The missives, the things for the sector in Budget 2026 fall woefully short of international best practice and the current state of the global and local creative economies. It does not understand how those industries function. And they do function differently than extractive and manufacturing industries, so there's that. And it does not understand the assets that are on the ground in Trinidad and Tobago and in diaspora. So that said, what we're going to do is I'm going to look at Budget 2026, what is there, and then I'm going to respond to what is there, and then I'm going to say what are the things that the sector submitted, which was again from previous consultations over the last 20-something years by Artists Coalition and from some smaller stakeholder conversations that will have happened before. And we aim to open up the consultations and conversations with artists in the coming weeks to wider and wider groups and that kind of stuff to kind of factor in that, because we are going to call for a summit with government, the cabinet, especially Prime Minister, Minister of Culture, Minister of Trade, Minister of Planning, Minister of Finance, and their PSs and technocrats to talk about this massive divide between the understanding of the government of what the sector is and its reality on the ground, and a global reality and a local reality. So look out for those calls, for those conversations and consultations. All right. So the thing is obviously that we can't afford this great divide between Trinidad and Tobago politicians and the reality of the creative sector any longer. Um, Especially because after COVID, there was massive collapses within the creative sector globally, but and other polities, people have responded. They've done a lot of different kinds of things, and there's been some rebound. Here, there has not been an active, aggressive kind of interventions on the ground, and so a lot of artist groups are still experiencing the collapses from COVID and the global inflation that has happened in the last 2 to 3 years post the Ukraine war have exacerbated a lot of those things. And so currently we're probably undergoing probably the most difficult period for citizens on a whole, but especially the creative class since probably the 1980s slump, post boom, right? So the thing is, we are in life and death territory with the creative classes. We're going to be seeing extinction level events for a number of different traditions within the local indigenous cultural community. There are a lot of things and traditions within the carnival, within Ramlila, within Hosei, with a lot of different things that we do, which are going to disappear if we don't take action right now because of the failure to transmit traditions generation to generation, the death of the older generations and those kinds of things. And we have some serious work to do. Apart from that, the pressures on the creative class right now, we're going to see more suicides, we're going to see more addiction, we're going to be seeing violence, we're going to see a lot of different kinds of things, mental breakdowns and those kinds of things. Unfortunately, unless we are able to create the safety nets and are able to do the things to be able to blossom the sector. And the thing is that the sector can rebound very, very quickly. That's the difference between our industry and other industries, is the geometric increases that are possible with injections and interventions. The creative product does not rely on continually multiplying the inputs to be able to produce the same amounts of outputs, right? Most of the concentration in the creative product is in the creation of the prototype. And after the prototype is created, meaning the song, the video, the film, the whatever, its reproduction and its mass production is almost free and infinite. And there are price points and incomes to be earned on its reproduction in those forms. So it has a vast advantage over extractive industries and manufacturing industries, which depend on physical products and stuff that are replicated through a whole elaborate forms of inputs and stuff and manufacturing processes. It's very, very different. And so the creative industries offers alarming amounts of and so to put into context, in the last 22, 23 years, the creative industries has been the growth economy and growth industry on planet Earth. In 2010, UNESCO figures it was earning $2.2 trillion annually. The latest figures point to somewhere around $3.14 trillion annually from the creative sectors. It's outstripped manufacturing and extractive industries during that period, and is the growth economy, and it is the gateway economy to the telecoms and service industries of the modern world. And so the creative industries, we've witnessed like from the growth of the museum and gallery complexes across the planet, incredible museums and stuff being created, the growth of the fine arts industries into multi-billion-dollar industries, even though right now there's a little like a little blip with the fine arts industry internationally. But the film industry, the renaissance in television, the golden age of television, streaming services, all those different kinds of things, there's billions and billions of dollars being pumped into television. A lot of different things, theater, all those different kinds of things, massive innovations and those kinds of things. The creative industry has been minting millionaires on an almost minute by minute rate for the last decade, 2 decades plus. because Trinidad and Tobago has not put in place the enabling mechanisms, and that's the policies, the legislation, and the infrastructure, the institutions, and the fiscal enablers in place, we have hardly been touched by that 2-decade trillion-dollar renaissance in the creative industries. And we've been telling our politicians that for 2 decades, but everybody bright. And so they failed to put in place those things. When we did put things in place, we won a small oasis when we got that done for the film industry. We got all the rebates, the custom duties, and those kinds of things removed. We signed international treaties. We created the international best practice setups and those kinds of things, alongside grants for the indigenous, the local industries and stuff. And during the 7-year period from around 2007 to 2013, thereabouts, where best practice ensued, we earned more than $150 million in GDP from visiting films and other things. And this that period, there were more than 400 films shot here. A number of them are features, mostly shorts, but features and stuff. The animation industry took off. There were dozens of production companies that were formed, employing hundreds of people during the productions of the films and the television series. During that period, it employed thousands of people, and a number of different people graduated to the international industries and stuff, and are working in, on major Hollywood studios, and then industries on both sides of the Atlantic. So we know that when best practice is put in place, there's a clear paper trail of what happens, right? We get enormous gains. If we do that right through as we're supposed to, we can see billion-dollar gains for the Trinidad and Tobago industries and economy, and we can see the empowerment of vast swaths of artists and creatives, and a lot of communities that are now collapsing could in fact be Renaissance-based communities. So let's jump into the what was said in the budget, and look at how things can function. Right. So the budget addressed, in what was spoken about in the Parliament, culture and the creative sector was addressed 4 times. It was addressed by direct sentences, with only 2 sentences in the entire 4-hour, 5-hour speech. 2 sentences. These were: the orange economy, creative economies. This is the Minister of Finance speaking. We will expand our cultural industries through a creative value chain fund supporting film, fashion, design, and music. Unquote. What does that mean? I don't know, and nobody in the sector knows. What is a creative value chain fund? Where is that coming from? How much is it? What is that? How is it set up? Whatever. What we do know is that the last administration scrapped Film TT, Fashion TT, and Music TT, those companies, and created a new kind of Frankenstein monster institution aligned to Exim Bank with 0 stakeholder consultation. No one knows how the new company functions, what it is, how it's supposed to work, and those kinds of things. What we know is that that is not what the sector asks for. There was an expert panel created in 2012, which I was kind of responsible for getting to happen with the rest of the Artists Coalition through our lobbying. And the recommendations of that panel was the creation of an arts council with desk for film, fashion, music, like those kinds of things, not the creation of the kind of companies that were formed thereafter. In fact, the late Pat Bishop died on that hill. She died in my arms 5 times. I revived her and stuff, and it was battling over this very thing. There were certain people who wanted to scrap the idea of an arts council, which is international best practice, and put in place these kinds of companies, and create this kind of which there's no international precedent for those things. We fought that. Pat died. We were able to stave it off for 1 year, and then they instituted it anyway, right? And since then, they have just been tinkering with that form and getting further and further away from international best practice, right? And so we don't know what that means in the budget. There's no clue on those kinds of things, and it is not international best practice. And we hope that it can be revisited by government. The other sentence read out in the budget was enhance IP protection and duty concessions will empower creatives and generate thousands of jobs. Now, when we sent in our thing, we had an extensive thing in terms of IP being intellectual property, right? I think that this is a kind of bastardized form of those sentences of our submissions that doesn't quite understand what IP is and how it works. Enhance IP protection and duty concessions will empower creative and generate thousands of jobs. Those are two different things. Intellectual property protection and duty concessions of creative goods and services are two different things. I don't know why they're in the same sentence. But again, we need to transform what that is, go into it and give meat on the bones of that for it to make sense. Right? But when we start to talk about what we have suggested, we will see that intellectual property is in fact a $1 billion earner, possible $1 billion earner for the country. But you need to understand what it is and what are the apparatus that you need to set up to be able to map it, curate it, broker it, and exploit it, right? In other parts of the budget, there are other things that touch on the creative sector tangentially, and so I'm going to look at those now. One is correcting the deficit of the Sports and Culture Fund, right? It goes into a long thing, finally pursuant to Section 23A of the National Lotteries Act. Instant lottery surplus is paid into the Sports and Culture Fund. However, over the years, the instant lottery has not been profitable, right? Resulting in years, there are no deposits in the Sports and Culture Fund. To combat this, deposits in the Sports and Culture Fund would be set up and approved by the Minister of Finance and would not be subject to instant lottery surplus, right? So this is actually a good thing, because the thing is that there are not many large-scale funds for the arts in Trinidad and Tobago, right? There are not many foundation grants, indigenous foundation grants, and large-scale funds for the creative cultural sector. The Sports and Culture Fund is one of those, and that's state-related. Now, lottery funds in places like Canada and England and other places and stuff are main sources of grant funding for the creative industries, right? That's how the lottery funds are looked at in England. In fact, massive buildings and stuff have been bought and handed over to the creative industries and those kinds of things using natural lottery funds, as apart from all the grant funding that through the Arts Council of Britain that lottery funds makes available to people. So it's great that the Sports and Culture Fund, which is under the purview of the Prime Minister's office, is able to get consistent funding to be able to raise its level so that it's available. The thing is what we need is a proliferation of such funds, or more monies going into that funds where it can be a serious transformative agent in the landscape, right? So that's a good thing that's there, that happens and affects us in a different way. There's a lot of talk about tourism and the heritage sector in the budget, and I have to say, heritage is the sleeping giant in Trinidad and Tobago. Properly curated and designed and programmed heritage sites can earn this country somewhere in the region of over $2 billion annually in a first instance, and that's a conservative estimate, right? We should be identifying, like how Antigua has 365 beaches, a beach for every day of the year. We can easily say that we can have 365 heritage sites, one for every day of the year. That's how rich Trinidad's cultural heritage is in terms of physical sites, in terms of heritage IP, in terms of living traditions, in terms of heroes, in terms of all kinds of different kinds of things. We can have multiple heritage sites all over the countries that can be hubs for communities, new economic and entrepreneurial hubs for communities. And that's the understanding that we need to get. But that's not the understanding in the budget of tourism and heritage sites. The tourism and heritage sites, as understood by Trinidad and Tobago politician, remains like Maracas Beach, and such matters and those kinds of things. Very, very traditional kind of sand and sea kinds of things, and even their interventions in terms of the design and infrastructural interventions and these sites are very, very conventional, very 1950s. It's just like plant and equipment at a very, very basic design level, that is not enhancing the destination in any way. There's no kind of programming in terms of the sites, in terms of like an on-site institutional and site administrator that programs events 24/7, 365 on the beaches, that makes it things that generate all those different kinds of things. So there's nothing innovative in those things, but yet still every single year you probably see Maracas spends on Maracas Beach. And I mean, many people would say Maracas Beach has not been enhanced much over the years. In fact, there are a lot of things that people might think have been degraded the original charm of the beach, right? And so the thing is that we need to get our minds out of those old conventional ideas of what heritage sites is. The V.S. Naipaul Lion House in Shigwanas as a multimedia Naipaul museum, or the Samuel Waldron Sculpture Park in New Village in Point Fortin, or CLR James's house. I just call three things that can easily be earning anywhere in the region of $60 to $80 million a year, and with more than 100,000, 200,000 visitors. Those are the kinds of sites that are possible, programmed and designed properly. But we'll get into a lot of those things. But so I'm contrasting that understanding with what's there in terms of the heritage and tourism spend in the national budget. So another thing that one of the mistakes that is made by a lot of politicians is, so we normally have those kind of 19th century Victorian ideas of industry and interventions like the Maracas spend, those things. And then when there is a new idea, it's some mega idea that is dangerous in its misunderstanding of the bones of the sector and the industry and how it works. One such thing is the new idea that has been the Minister of Trade particularly is on about, and there's a kernels of possibilities inside there, but the big idea is dangerous. It's just the idea of a carnival city, right? And so there's this idea that, okay, so carnival makes all this money, and so therefore if we have carnival 365 days a year, we will multiply the $1.6 billion that carnival brings in every year. It just does not work like that. And so it's almost like creating a Disney kind of thing out of carnival and stuff. That's a complete misunderstanding of the nature of the destination that is the carnival infrastructure that is needed. Possibly what is needed is a carnival and steel band, not possibly, what is needed is a carnival and steel band museum, right? That should be in the savannah, and that is a wonder of a world. That it's going to be a wonder in the world. Its design and its architectural design and look and feel is going to bring people from all over the planet. Its content in terms of the recreation of the 100 greatest costumes of all time, that are visible there. Like you probably have 30 of them at any one point in time, and they rotate like that. And there's a restaurant in the middle where these every day, twice a day or 3 times a day, the costumes dance, certain select costumes dance. So you could say, okay, I'm gonna go on Tuesday, April, the whatever to see Tantana dance, or I'm gonna go and see this to see Beauty in Perpetuity dance, or what. Those are the kinds of things that make things. But the idea of a carnival city, which I know the idea that they have is this kind of thing with all this all these performers being, you're going to create, you don't understand the economics that goes into the creation of Disney type destinations, and that's not the type of economics that we have, right? It's not what's necessary. What is necessary is that well designed, well programmed museum with certain programmable things that happen that makes it recurring and renewing, and those kinds of things. But the idea of the carnival city in the ways that it's spoken about is kind of dangerous, and it could be a white elephant, and it can lose the country millions of dollars. In the same way that, name 3 things that we do that brings in visitors outside of Carnival, Point Fortune Borrow Day, and conference tourism. I'll stay here and wait. Have any of the music festivals in Trinidad brought in major foreigners into the country to attend any of them? Has any event that we have thrown with the explicit targets of going after international tourists and that kind of stuff, have any of them worked? Culinary events, musical events, design events, any? No. So it means that there is a massive gap in our understanding of what attracts the tourists, even though there are things that we are doing that do. And so before people leap off into grand things like a carnival city, we need to get to grips with the realities of what we do that makes a destination and what we're not doing, and deal with those realities and stuff, right? So just something to put a pin there. We like the enthusiasm, but it needs to be regulated with reality. There also is something that's not directly related to the creative industries, but there's a new thing to have direct flights of US tourists into Tobago, right? Direct US flights into Tobago. That could be a serious game changer for the creative industries. And so that's something that we need to look at and sit down with the THA, sit down with the airlines and those kinds of things. And the creative industries can be not only beneficiaries of that, but they can be the thing that makes that thing work, and that can multiply the flights and those kinds of things and make that destination even more worthwhile than it is, right? The last part of the budget that's in the it's a little bit more in terms of economic infrastructure that's in the budget, right? So there's things about the Orange Hill Community Workshop and Art Gallery project in Tobago. There's a turtle tourism and avian capital initiative for leatherback turtles, Turtle Village, Magdalena. There are a couple of projects like that, implement the Hilton rooms and those kinds of things. And there's something about the Queen's Park Savannah becoming a UNESCO World Heritage Site, right? Surrounded by the Magnificent Seven and all those kinds of things. What I'll say to that is, the Queen's Park Savannah needs to be so, and that kind of stuff. Again, the big bugbear is the Grandstand complex and the North Stand complex that exists there right now. If we are going to make a infrastructural intervention in the Savannah, it needs to be the Carnival and Steel Band Museum, this incredible architectural marvel, and it's something that should post from its ground up, take into consideration all the landscape and the ecology of the Savannah, and the fact that it's this major aquifer for the city and those kinds of things. When it goes down, it should actually create massive reservoirs and those kinds of things underneath the building, and so that all the groundwater that comes off the northern range that flows down and that kind of stuff could be captured. So that facility should not even be using water or energy from off the grid. It should be creating its own energy with wind, solar. So all of that should be happening inside that design facility. And then you could have a savanna facility that also does all the heritage-based things that you'd want a heritage site to do, a UNESCO heritage site to do. You know, pay tribute to the sporting excellence that has passed through Savannah, the horse racing things, the Savannah, the carnivals that pass through Savannah, all the sporting things, and all those other kinds of things. And it's a site as a site for many other kinds of historical events and those kinds of things. Apart from that, one of the medium to long-term plans of the artist is to have that entire part of Port of Spain, from Memorial Park, the museum complex, Napa, unfortunately with its badly designed self, the Savannah, going all around to the Magnificent Seven, all the way around to the zoo, and to Queen's Hall in St. Anne's, and then Belmont as Heritage Village, to be an entire creative, the creative zone of Port of Spain, right? So that if you could imagine that entire zone, which is walkable, to be full of museums, heritage sites, small and medium and larger niche museums, performance halls, small chamber music halls, spaces for choirs, all those kinds of things, small theaters, all those kinds of things all the way around. And in between, of course, you have your eating spaces, you have all those kinds of things. You have, like, you know, like in Barbados, there's one of the major heritage sites is a space for indigenous ice cream, right? So people go to one of these grand old houses and that kind of stuff, and they go for the ice cream. And we can have that entire space where you can either go to the Carnival and Street Band Museum, the National Museum, you could go to theaters, you could go to music spaces, all in these beautiful appointed heritage houses and those kinds of things, all the way up to the zoo. You could go to the Magnificent Seven, you could go to, you know, all of those things. And then you have Belmont itself, which is, you know, in Ivan Loughlin's incredible visioning, entire heritage village, you know, and, you know, and where you can have artists in residences, artist colonies, all these different kinds of things in Belmont and that kind of stuff, you know, which is already happening on its own with the cloth and with Grandison Yard and all those other spaces and those kinds of things there. But imagine that proliferated. And yeah, that now becomes a capital city. That is something where, you know, and then you have the food court that's already existing in the savannah and that kind of stuff. That's the kind of vision that we kind of need to attach to something like that the government wants to go after. Right? So again, as I said, Maracas, Pigeon Point, Storby, those are the kinds of things that are there. The normal spends are there again in the PSIP, the Public Service Investment parts of the budget documents, which are not read, but which are where the real budget happens with their spends. You see most of the spends again going to rehab in terms of Napa, Sapa, Queen's Hall, the Naparima Bowl, the National Museum, San Andreas Museum. San Andreas Museum, which is on Broadway, is a point of contention for artists. At a number of different times it's been assigned to different things, and it's now floating in between, and there's nothing effectively happening there, right? So it's Fort San Andreas. It's where in the yard there used to be one of the trains, one of the bodies of one of the trains in Trinidad and Tobago, and it also used to have the body of the Hummingbird 2, the boat that the Labords circumnavigated the country in. Imagine those two things set up as immersive, interactive exhibitions where you can go into the boat and see whatever, and you can model and stuff and all the things you could see, multimedia kinds of things. Here we are in Papua New Guinea, here we are where the film, the Laborde film is played and those kinds of things, where in the train you could sit down in the train and imagine what it's like to be a conductor, or there's multimedia stuff there and that kind of things that reproduces. That's what a museum is supposed to be. The San Andreas Museum has at different times been said it should be a museum of the city of Port of Spain, so the history of Port of Spain and those kinds of things, which are incredible, exciting history from indigenous times, right? When around the Red House, Concorabia, that was one of the sites, one of the major sacred sites and settlements of the Taino peoples, the Kalinago Warao, first peoples of Trinidad and Tobago, to the colonial savagery, to the coming of all the significant other migrations and the expansion of Port of Spain to become one of the cultural capitals of planet Earth, right? One of the 20 cities that you could say has affected the cultural and economic and the existential life of the planet. And so yeah, San Andres could be that. There's also outstanding work that was done in terms of making the San Andres Museum a museum of the social movements and social history of Trinidad and Tobago. Movements of people, large movements like the trade union movement, Black Power movements in terms of East Indian sovereignty and cultural sovereignty, rural movements of activism and those kinds of different kinds of activism and those kinds, even including artist activism and those kinds of things, but all the different social groups that have been able to impact the society in major ways, and have humanized the country, from the Rubaya Butler and all these great Colorienzi and all the great leaders, the social leaders, the Pan-Africanists, all of them. A space devoted to the story of the people and the movement of the people and the way that the people have transformed the nation. It could possibly be both, you know. It could possibly be both. One floor is history of Port of Spain and the next floor is the social movements. But what is clear is that San Andres needs to be programmed and designed properly. And so a lot of the things that when I go into what we need to do is to get that understanding of what is the difference in designing and programming that needs to happen to make heritage sites and tourism sites function as international best practice and multi-million-dollar earners. We looked at what was presented in the budget, responded to it critically, and we said coming out of that the divide between the government's understanding of this sector and its global and local realities is now too wide. That chasm is too wide, and we're calling for a summit with the Prime Minister, the Honorable Prime Minister, line ministers, senior technocrats, and those kinds of things, for us to present on the realities of the global and local realities of the sector and the real types of interventions that are necessary. So we did that forensics in the first part, and now we're going to go into what the sector actually submitted for the budget, right? So we're gonna jump straight into that. So right. So the thing is that, again, I need to give the context. Global creative sector, creative industries, the last 20-something years, since around 1997, 1998, has become the second largest industry on the planet. UNESCO's figures is $2.2 trillion annually. In 2010, their more recent figures are somewhere around $3.14 trillion annually, right? It is, whereas extractive industries and manufacturing has flatlined in terms of growth and those kinds of things, the creative industries have been a continual upward march during that period, and it is the gateway industries into the service sectors, the service industries, and the telecom, the new kind of telecom and online kinds of industries and those kinds of things. One of the reasons that Trinidad and Tobago has not been able to participate in that $1 trillion expansion of the creative industries, which is television and film and animation, in terms of the fine arts and theater, in terms of all of these different things, is because we have failed we have failed to put in place the enabling environment, which is an international best practice across the planet, has been put in place in 4 waves since the 1920s. Right? In the 1920s, you had the first wave, the first world countries and that kind of stuff implemented quotas on their film industries and those kinds of things to protect themselves from America. Right? So they started to put in place percentages and those kinds of things. They have to have a certain amount of French, whatever, whatever, those kinds of things, and only so much US stuff. They consolidated their heritage industries in terms of how they went after the protection of their heritage, the way that they programmed their museums and all those different kinds of things. They had the formation of the arts councils and those kinds of things coming out of those things. And in successive waves since then, all the enabling architecture was put in place here, and not here, but in the developed world, but also in a lot of developing countries. So much so that there a lot of developing countries and that kind of stuff have now been able to profit from the renaissance in the creative industries. So so much so that the UK, England, they started retooling a lot of parts of their economies to deal with the sector in the late 90s and stuff. This is what they've been reaping since then. In 2014, the UK economy was earning £230.4 million a day from the creative industries. Right? £230.4 million a day from the creative industries. Right? Multiply that by 8 and you get a sense of how much it is in Trinidad and Tobago dollars. Right? That's madness. That's crazy. That's billions of TT dollars a day from the creative industries. Right? It just goes to show what and we normally tell people, like, in our Trinidad and Tobago, we are still dealing with, when we think about the economy and we talk about those kinds of things, we still think that it's like the 19th century. Oil and gas is king, and manufacturing and extractive industries is where it's at, and that lawyers and doctors, that's where you need to be a lawyer, doctor. We still in that sense. The world has changed enormously. I say, we tell them, like, there are video game companies bigger than oil and gas companies. There are skateboarders richer than our richest people in the country. The amount of working class people that have been transformed into millionaires overnight because of the creative industries over the last couple decades is ridiculous. Simply because of talent and the monetization of talent that is now part and parcel of the modern world. And so that's what we want to talk about now. So let's jump into Artists Coalition of Trinidad and Tobago and stakeholders. This is a summation of things that over the last 2 decades of stakeholder consultations and those kinds of things, refined, and we held a couple, smaller, very small stakeholder consultations before the budget and that kind of stuff. So one of the things that we said off the bat is that government should have a national buy local campaign led by the creative sector, with local celebrities from the sports and the arts driving this campaign. Now, Trinidad and Tobago has a massive foreign exchange crisis issue, right? The demand for foreign exchange outstrips the supply of it, and there's a lot more foreign exchange leaving, or food import bill, all those different kinds of things. This buy local campaign drives money and keeps the money and retains money locally. It also helps build the capacity of local creators, manufacturers, producers, and those kinds of things to be able to grade up to capacity, to export level capacity, where they can be earners of foreign exchange. And so this should be happening from ground up, right? So low-hanging fruit thing, every 2 weeks we should be having farmers markets twinned with artisan markets, twinned with local performers in every single public square in the country. All those green spaces in local communities, capital cities, boroughs, and those things, and towns, they should be filled every other week with farmers markets, artisan markets, and local performers. Let municipal authorities program and run these events and stuff. It brings community out into public space. It reclaims public space from criminality and those kinds of things. It makes the community more secure. It creates local economies within communities, and it starts off hubs. And as I said, it starts the generation of capacity with local producers, where they could now start to plan. You say, okay, every other week I have a massive opportunity to meet the public, earn income, and those kinds of things, and you could start to plan capacity and those kinds of things to ramp up to be able to reach the export capacity. So this buy local campaign, this is involving our industrial products as well as our, so it's small, medium, and large companies and products taking part in this. And in this way also, there could now be cross-pollination between the local celebrities and the local brands and all those different kinds of things that needed to happen all the time. But this now drives those things together, right? So that campaign could be enormous patriotic and economic fillip to the society. Attendant to that, we need to revive the local content chamber which existed before and which went into abeyance. It was taken into a former prime minister's office and strangled. It needs to be liberated and come back, and attached to that was a national local content policy that was being worked on in the past that also went that particular way, where all the chambers of commerce, manufacturing associations, the Artists Coalition, all the different large groups who were producing the TTCSI, all of them were part of that process to create a policy, a local content policy, especially in terms of state usage of things. So imagine state events should only be using local products, only using local brands. When you're populating your space and you're creating your furniture, all those kind of things, your first point of call should be local manufacturers, local producers, local carpenters, local, So that policy then drives all the engines of creating the cachet to be able to grow local business to the point of export potential, right? Central, so I should call them out in order. Say number 3, establish a national arts council. We cannot grow a creative economy without an arm's length arts council. What is an arts council? An arts council is an arm's length arts council is an institution responsible for seasonal, transparent grant funding for the sector, right? For every single tradition and genre within a sector, within the sector. It is the gold standard for seed funding, grant allocation, and artistic incubation internationally. There are no successful sectors without proper arts council and seed capital grant funding. None. We do not have anything like that in Trinidad. However you catch yourself to find your money, you find your money in Trinidad, right? There needs to be funds every single year, twice a year, seasonal calls where dancers know, okay, there's $4 million for dance or $2 million for dance and that kind of stuff, split up from small funds as small as $500 all the way up to $150,000. There are a lot of people who don't understand how the creative industries work and those kind of things. Say, well, we are just giving away money to artists getting free money, all those kind of things, and not quite understanding. All those people that you see internationally, from Mr. Bean and even Beyonce and all of them have received grant funding at different levels of their existence and those kinds of things. All of these people exist because of, that kind of stuff. One of the greatest stories of grant funding in industry's history is there was once this unemployed teacher, female teacher. She had a history of like kind of bad decisions with men and that kind of stuff. So she was going through one of her depressions and that kind of stuff. She's unemployed and that kind of stuff. And she was traveling in the tube, in the train and trains. And she saw in her mind's eye suddenly an image of a boy with a lightning scar on his forehead. And she started to jot down the idea that she had from this. She applied to the Scottish Arts Council, part of the larger UK Arts Council. She got a grant of £8,000. That grant enabled her to write the book Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. At the last check, Harry Potter was worth over £20 billion to the UK industry, economy. Harry Potter was single-handedly said to be the thing that rescued the international publishing industry, books publishing, from an £8,000 investment. That's the power of grant funding. Grant funding operates on the supposition that you do not know where the great talent and the genius lies. None of us know. Now, we know from what exists on the ground right now, we can say, okay, there's a canon. There's such a thing as grandmasters and masters and genius and excellence, and we can see that that's on the ground right now. We can say, right, Minshall, Leroy Clark, Lovelace, bam, bam, bam. We could say, right. But you do not know what's going to come next. Nobody knows what's coming next. You do not know. Even from when even people submit their things for grants, you don't know. All you know is that, okay, this is worthy enough to get £8,000. This book is, whatever. You don't know what's going to come from it. None of us know. But the amount of things that can be released, the economies that can be released, the power that can be released when you do that, when you have democratic, accessible, equitable grant funding, right? If you were to look at the history of hip-hop, right, which has produced hundreds of billions of dollars for the US economy, and you were to do a rogues gallery of all the great hip-hop artists that are responsible for those economies, you would get a gallery that is 99.9999999% black, and guys that looking like people who work in CPEP or URP, right? Working class black men, urban black men mostly. Those men are responsible for that multi-billion-dollar industry that has changed the culture of planet Earth. In the same way, if you were to look at the the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I remember watching Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and one year, that nearly every single band that was inducted that year had a mortality rate from guys overdosing on drugs, right? So like you watch like everybody in all the guys, all these bands, major addicts, and I mean major addicts. However, those guys, those bands are responsible for some of the most beautiful music heard on planet Earth in the last 40 years. And each one of those bands have earned their label and the US economy literally hundreds of millions of dollars. But they're addicts, they're drug addicts. So that's what the industry is based on, a whole slew of individuals and those kinds of things who maybe drop out and all these different kinds of things. But they are the ones responsible for the genius of the planet that keeps the planet moving, right? And if you were to put all your kind of moralistic and all your other kinds of things in terms of whoever, then nothing gets funded and nothing gets done. Grant funding is through an arts council, an arm's length arts council, using peer-based assessment, which is a form of assessment which is able to cut down on nepotism, corruption, friendism, contactism, all the other dramas that exist everywhere on the planet and which we of course excel. It enables that to be cut out and you're able to get to the best talents on the ground. So we have to establish a National Arts Council. It is the basis of all the other talents and all the other products and all those other things that come from. Arts Council is the base. We need to increase the funding for whatever that agency, that Creative TT, that was once Film TT, Fashion TT, and whoever. Those things, that needs to be funded properly. There was a period of time when grant funding for film in Trinidad and Tobago was just a little more than 1 million TT dollars. That, of course, is madness. For a film industry, 1 million TT dollars for the industry, that is craziness. That is not even the catering budget on a small independent US film. We have to do better than that. Grant funding for production, film production in Trinidad and Tobago should start at $25 million. That should be baseline. And every year, the sector should target the creation of at least one feature film and one television series for international distribution, to go hard at it. Right? These are the ones that are chosen by the industry to go ahead with. We should be targeting at least one product getting streaming service contracts, deals every single year. We should really be getting more than that, but we should do that. We should target somewhere in the region of $10 to $30 million in terms of foreign ticket sales for our movies. That means taking seriously the cinemas and stuff that we have relationships, or community centers, or whatever the spaces that we have relationships with internationally, and getting our films from our shorts or long form films or documentaries, all those things, into those spaces, and getting gate receipts coming back in as forex coming at in. And that's a conservative estimate, right, of $10 to $30 million in terms of ticket sales, right? I mean, you know that you say box office, international box office for US films and those kinds of things. We need to be doing the same thing, tracking our films and that kind of stuff. That means a more intimate and informed approach in film distribution by whatever agency that's supposed to be overlooking this stuff. Towards that, we are suggesting the creation of a national tour company, a Trinidad and Tobago tour company, or creative export company, or desk. It's really a desk. What that desk is just a brain trust of the people who most understand the international marketplace and how to position products in that marketplace. So that is especially film and music and those kinds of things, right? So we have people like Jean-Michel Gibert, who was previously owned Caribbean Music Group and Rituals, the late Nestor Sullivan, who ran Panberry as the most successful touring group in Trinidad, and other people, you know, who have that information in fine arts and different fields and those kinds of things of the international marketplace and how to position product in those spaces and how to create those things. You have people like Martin Raymond, who's a member of the Grammy Academy, recording the Academy of Recording Industries. So he is somebody who should be there, and a number of other such people who understand how to position those products and those kinds of things and get us into the international expos, get us into the market spaces, get us into the trade expos, the craft expos, all those different kinds of things to position people into spaces to earn forex and to become international players, right? Number 6, we have to address the human crisis in the sector. So at the top of everything, I spoke about this being possibly the most difficult period for citizens since the slump in the early 80s, and especially for the creative sector, and that we are currently experiencing, and we are going to experience more suicides, mental breakdowns, impoverishment, and those kinds of things, right? We need to have safety nets, and we need to take the empowering of the sector very, very seriously. Now, right, just a couple of weeks ago, Ireland passed the first universal wage for artists, right? So they are giving artists, I think, weekly or monthly wages just to live, right? They did the studies and those kinds of things, and they saw that for X amount of money spent on artists in the cultural sector, there were always these multiple percentage returns to the economy. And so money spent on artists has always been returned to the economy and expanded. And it made sense to see after the creative citizens at a difficult point in the economy. So the universal wage is something that's possible, that can be looked at. We did a look at $300, I think $300 a week for 2,000 artists. I think came up to $20-something million annually. I can't remember the exact figures, but yeah, $20-something million annually. So that might be, choosing your most affected people from all the different fields. 2,000 people, $300 a week gets you out of a lot of grief, and into a space where artists can live and work and produce, be productive. There is the insurance scheme that we looked at, and we pioneered, and about 16 to 17 years ago, one of our member groups actually got it done. So they went to a local insurance company, and for, I believe it was 2.1 million a year, we were able to pay the premiums. I would have paid the premiums for 2,040 artists, I believe, right? From all the different groups. That's fully comprehensive, life, health, etc. That's incredible. Because the thing is that government doesn't do anything like that. It's not interested in like way giving money to artists, whoever. But when people die, when people get sick, they go to government, and then government have to find money and scramble to pay for a funeral, to pay medical expenses and whatever. However, for $2 million, you could see about 2,040 artists. And I think what we had said was that for the first 5 years, the government will subsidize it completely. Then after that, on a sliding scale, artists will take over. By that time, they would have savings, they would see the value of it, they would have lived the value of it and those kinds of things, and then you'll be able to program it like that. We had it in thing, it went all the way up to budget just before cabinet note thing, and then it was dropped. You know who adopted it? Jamaica. So late last year, Jamaica instituted the insurance scheme for their artists across the board, musicians, fine artists, all those different kinds of things. So no, Jamaican artists now have insurance coverage, and Trinidadians don't. That's something else that we could look at in terms of right. So one of the issues that we see as regards this human crisis of the arts and that kind of stuff is that, 63 years independence, through national budgets, we spent over $1 trillion in the last 2 decades plus in public money. And artists have contributed enormously to the countries in terms of the economics of the country, in terms of our international brand, in terms of the richness and of our life, a standard of living, of our, the richness of our living, and all the different things, the heroes and the pathways and all those different kinds of things. Yet most artist groups are still homeless, right? Theater, dance are homeless entities. In most of the countries that we aspire to be like, and those kinds of things, not only the umbrella groups have homes granted to them by the state, but even smaller groups, individual groups, have such. And some of them are gratis, given over free of charge, architecturally built up and other things, and handed over to them. Some are at peppercorn rents, some are leased over a long period of time, 50 years, 99 years, 150 years, whatever, with sliding scales of rentals and those kinds of things. Artists need homes. You have the Barbican multimedia theatre facility in London. You have the Royal National Theatre in London. You have the Film Institute, British Film Institute. All these are major buildings handed over from the state to artist groups and those kinds of things. All of the things I call there are international brands that are civilization changing brands, and they all live in homes that were handed over to them by the state. And there's literally hundreds and hundreds of examples all over Europe, the EU, America and such, Latin America and those kinds of things. We have to get serious about such things. We are suggesting the creation of 5 creative hubs as templates of how this could be done in Northeast, Northwest, Central, South, to Trinidad and in Tobago. There's a whole set of abandoned building stock all over the place. We just had a case of the Texaco abandoned building burning in South Trinidad. In South, there is on the old road, there are hundreds of buildings, abandoned oil and gas buildings on that thing, and then the abandoned petrotrin stock, from building stock to factories to warehouse facilities to massive communal spaces and those kinds of things, all abandoned, all rotting, and that's madness, right? When there are NGOs, artist groups, and all those kinds of things that can take those spaces and take those things and create them and turn them over into growing concerns. All in Port of Spain, every single street in Port of Spain, abandoned stock, right? Private and public sector stock. We should be handing over those spaces. And the thing is, Port of Spain proper has been collapsing as a city. Artist colonies and artist hubs are being used as urban renewal sites and strategies throughout time in both America and Europe, but especially in the last 2 decades. You have the EU, Paris, Finland, England, Germany. You have spaces like that have incubated enormous industries and economies and those kinds of things, artist-led spaces and those kinds of things. Miami, Chicago, LA, Detroit, New York in America. You have artist spaces and those kinds of things. You have Wynwood in Miami. Incredible spaces and those kinds of things handed over to the creative industries and creative people, and they have now revamped collapsing spaces, dead zones, warehouse districts, all those kinds of things, flip them into becoming major growing concerns. So much so that the real estate gets so valuable that they now start to gentrify and want to kick out the artists and bringing, we don't want that to happen. But we want artists to be given access so that the one thing they don't have to think about is rental and space. And once you have the comfort of home and comfort of space, you have the ability to plan and dream and vision and collaborate and innovate and all of those kinds of things. So we're saying 5 creative hubs: Northwest, Northeast, Central, South, and Tobago. We need to set targets for Carnival, right? So Carnival at its height brought in 65,000 visitors, right? That's around 2008.
just before the down to the international collapse, right? That was at the height. At about that point in time, we were earning $1.3 billion in forex for the carnival. In 2024, it is reported by government that that carnival earned $1.6 billion, right? And we had brought the visitor arrivals up to, I think, back to about 62,000. We should be targeting 70,000 visitors. We don't have stock, room stock to put all those people in. But if we bring in 3 or 4 large cruise liners, we can reach those figures and exceed those figures. And we should be targeting about $2 billion in forex for carnival. And then we could start to ramp it up and grow it and grow it and grow it and grow it. But those are simple things that we can do and that we can target, and we can track that income and those kinds of things. Pan yards. So we're going through a pan renaissance. In fact, pan is the cultural item that is the most active and most alive thing in the town at the moment, in the whole of Trinidad and Tobago. It is driving creativity, driving communal participation. It is driving the old Trinbagonian values, right? All those values of joy, of a civilization based on joy, of communality, of freeness and beauty and that kind of energy. Pan is doing that. Part of it is because of one of the things that the Artists Coalition won, which is the pan yards. So pan yards now have access to grant funding where they can ramp up the stock of their pan yard and those kinds of things, right? So pan yards have been able to, improve and become monetized spaces and those kinds of things. But let's take it to the next level. Only about less than 20 bands actually own the land that they're on. There are over 235 pan signs in Trinidad and Tobago, right? A lot of them are orchestra-sized bands. 65 to 75% of those bands are on state lands. With a signature, a ministerial signature, we could regularize the land tenure of all the bands that are on state lands. It will be the largest migration of wealth into the hands of the creative classes, into the hands of the roots classes and working class communities in Trinidad and Tobago's history. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars will immediately move over into the hands of those pan signs. And now they can start to negotiate and figure out on how to monetize and grow their real estate and their everything, from their building stock to their human capital to everything, right? Now, as part of, there's a cabinet note that we drafted, myself, Nestor Sullivan, to that effect that exists. Part of that was management training ramping up for all of the pan yards, so they have to compulsorily go through this management training exercise. They have to form, if they're not legal entities, they have to form legal entities and those kinds of things, and that there is a trust company that overlooks for the first couple of years all the things that the pan yards want to do. If they want to go and get a loan, they want to go work, because one thing you don't want to do is that banks own all the pan yards within the next 5 years, because people are not accustomed to dealing with property and capitalization and those kinds of things. So this trust company will help them overlook and be like almost, like an angel, not investor, but an angel participant in the process. So regularizing the land tenure pan yards is a major process. As I said before, heritage, in the first part we talked about heritage being the sleeping giant, right? The Honorable Prime Minister has taken heritage out of Ministry of Culture and put it under her purview in the office of the Prime Minister. This may be a good thing. If we can get the Prime Minister to ally with heritage and this new look at how heritage should be seen and to be transformed in our estimation. As we said before in the last talk, that the Ministry of Planning, Finance, Tourism, Culture don't understand destination tourism. They don't understand how to program and design international best practice destinations. So Trinidad has no international best practice destinations. There's no destination in Trinidad that is earning $350,000 a day, $1 million every. We don't have any of those things because we are not programming and designing things properly. And so what we are suggesting is ramping up our understanding and programming and design of all these facilities, and also expanding our understanding of what those facilities are. So it's not Turtle Beach and Maracas Bay, and yes, those things are important and those kinds of things, but it's things like, as I said before, the V.S. Naipaul Lion House, the C.R.R. James House, the Samuel Waldron Sculpture Park in Point Fortin in New Village, the homes of the Pan-Africanists, the Jose Riot Muharram Monument, 1884 Monument, Brinsley Samaru's Sugar and Heritage Museum, all of these things. These are nothing I call there should be earning less than $50 million a year as starters. You know, a shadow museum for and Calypso Rose museums for Tobago. I mean, could you imagine these things done properly, what they could be like? As I said, we should be targeting 365, just like our Antigua has 365 beaches. We should be targeting 365 heritage sites, monetized heritage sites. That's a long-term plan. We are saying for the next year, we should take 12 to 20 sites, and go after them as international best practice monetizable sites. Complete programming and design overhauls and those kinds of things. Pour the money into them. It means, one, that you have to fund the National Trust properly for their listing of buildings. So we're also saying that the listing process to have things protected is very expensive and is a long process, arduous process. It takes 2 years and more at times. If you had the money to be able to list, you can do it at a faster clip and you can get more protected sites in Trinidad. We should be targeting about 50 sites a year, possibly, and that would mean a vast upgrade in terms of the funding for the National Trust. But the National Trust will repay all of that, because we're saying that heritage can easily be earning about $2 billion annually, right? That's destination tourism taken to the, to the next level. And so we would like to have that be looked at seriously, and some serious money we put in those things. About $60 million might get us to the next level. And I'm talking about any one of those sites, the Diego Martin Home of Calypso site, all of those sites can be earning that $60 million, right? So that's chump change, and quickly too. On the subject of heritage, the East Port of Spain Growth Pole and Heritage City. This was something that the Artists Coalition and the MSJ won in the previous incarnation of government. So there are a whole set of growth poles. Most of the growth poles were associated in conventional industry and those kinds of things. We said that there is a human capital based growth pole in East Port of Spain. East Port of Spain, the Holy Trinity of Pan, Mass and Calypso are midwifed in East Port of Spain. East Port of Spain is the midwife of those three things. There are 300 Trinidad style carnivals on planet Earth. 1 Venice Carnival, 1 New Orleans Carnival, 1 Brazilian Carnival. 300 plus Trinidad style carnivals. The 2 largest street festivals on planet Earth in the Western world are Trinidad style carnivals. London, Notting Hill, Brooklyn, Labor Day, 4 million people at their height. Those 300 plus Trinidad style carnivals are worth over $15 billion annually, and that's 2010 figures, right? So they easily could be worth more than $20 billion annually. We don't receive repatriation from a lot of that earnings and those kind of things because we're not clued in, we're not understanding our duty and our mission, having done that work, right? And far less for East Port of Spain. East Port of Spain doesn't reap the benefit. So we're saying that East Port of Spain, because it's such a powerful community, that in its collapse or in its rise, it takes the rest of Caribbean, the Trinidad and Tobago with it. At its height, when it was in its golden age power, it midwifed Pan, Mars, and Calypso into existence and gave us all the gifts that a whole set of elites now reaping the benefit of, right? And the entire brand of Trinidad and Tobago internationally and those kinds of things. Nothing was ever, no reparations was ever paid to East Port of Spain for the gift of those things that it gave to us. Instead, they've been marginalized, they've been stereotyped, they've been under-resourced, and all of those things. They've been over-policed and all of those kinds of things. We're seeing the Heritage City, East Port of Spain. There are a number of projects inside there. We worked with the East Port of Spain Council of Community Organizations for a decade plus, and there are plans created by them, incredible plans, street by street, block by block, short, medium, and long-term plans for that part of things. So we're saying choose small, medium, and long-term, and small, medium, large size projects. There's the Observatory Street Guild, Artisan Guild project. So Observatory Street by the Plannings, by just behind Charlotte Street, going up to the Savannah and Belmont there. That's the Plannings, criminality, a whole lot of different kinds of things, and those kinds of things. Also, one of the seats of culture in East Port of Spain. The housing stock there is incredible. That entire road that leads from the hospital straight to Charlotte Street and to behind the bridge is one of the most beautiful passages of heritage buildings in the country. Imagine the artisan guilds of Trinidad and Tobago, the carpentry guilds, plumbers guilds, electricians guilds, all of those guilds and stuff, masons, all those kinds of things situated in all of that housing stock. And they painted over all these beautiful pastels and those kinds of things. You have all the elder artisans and stuff seated there, working with the young boys and those kind of things, apprenticing, bringing them up to grade and those kinds of things. Transforming that entire part. You have the Picton Observatory, the Fort Picton, converted into a restaurant. You have the House of Music, Museum of Trinidad and Tobago Music on George and Henry Street. There are all kinds of projects and stuff. East Port of Spain needs the attention. It needs the capital investment. The Carnival Factory, right? Where, you know, all the bands and stuff, for the 300 Trinidad style carnivals, the costumes are created and stuff, situated inside of East Port of Spain, employ those people 24/7, 365 days a year. You're talking about Carnival City, that's the Carnival City that we need to create, right? That factory that is challenging China for manufacturing of costumes and those kinds of things, and sending that stuff out internationally all over the world. Talking about infrastructure like that, we need to create a national heritage warehouse, a facility that overlooks the curation and conservation of a lot of our disappearing national collections, right? We just had a situation where we lost the Gael Banyan collection to Barbados. Mia Motley bought the incredible collection created by Christopher Laird, Bruce Paddington, Tony Hall, Errol Sitahal over the years of the existence of Banyan. That's 30-something years of Trinidad and Tobago television history and Caribbean television history. We did not see the importance of it, private or public sector. Barbados now owns it. There are literally about 100 and something collections that are in clear and present danger of destruction, that need to be preserved and conserved, and most of them in private hands at the moment. So everything from the Peter Minshall's collection to Jackie Hingson's collection to many others like that, photographic collections and stuff owned by families and those kinds of things. We need to create a massive, or rent a massive warehouse and hand it over to experts, curators, archaeologists, preservationists, conservationists, to look after the these collections. That warehouse itself could end up being, in the short term, the most visited destination in Trinidad and Tobago because of the richness of collections that it would hold inside of it. You can target over 400,000 people annually in a facility like that. Yeah, you could be driving over $100 million worth of business through a facility like that because of the amount of things that it holds and how it will be displayed and those kinds of things. And because we don't have the money in the short term to go after the creation of the kinds of museums we need and the kind of heritage sites we need, so which will deploy a lot of those collections, the heritage site is a short-term, low-hanging fruit way to be able to conserve, capture and conserve and curate the collections until such a time that we have the money to invest in creation of the heritage sites and museums necessary. Yeah.
Ready? Yeah.
Hi guys, Ruby Victor again, multimedia artist working in 8 mediums and president of the Artists Coalition of Trinidad and Tobago. And so we're concluding this series looking at Budget 2026 and what it held for the creative industries and cultural sector. And in this last couple talks, I've been talking about what were the artists' submissions to government, and which we would like to present this and some other things to a summit. We're calling for a summit with the cabinet, with the Honorable Prime Minister, Ministers of Trade, Culture, Planning, Finance, the PSs and technocrats and that kind of stuff, to kind of close the divide between the understanding of the sector by the politicians and technocrats and the realities on the ground, globally and locally, right? And so we're continuing looking at what were the things that the artists have suggested, as compiled from some short consultations that were held before the budget by ourselves, but from longer research things over a course of 20 years of consultations and work from the Artists Coalition. So we reached number 5 in the second part, and we're looking at the return of Caribbean Song Basin, right? And we're looking at the return or the expansion of the music industry, right? So the Caribbean Song Basin in Maraval, the facility created by Robert Amar, which was responsible for the Kiskadi Caravan and those kinds of things, and was responsible for the change in the sound of Trinidad and Tobago music, the modernizing of the sound of Trinidad and Tobago music, and a lot of the internationalization of the brand and those kinds of things, right? He's nefarious now, but P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, all his hits from that Notorious B.I.G., the album and those kind of things, and the locks and all those different kinds of things, those things were recorded in CSB. Tony, all those different kinds of things were recorded there. There are a number of international hits recorded in that studio. It was one of the studios that partially responsible for 1998, which was the year that Black American culture became mainstream American culture, took over white culture, took over where black music and hip hop took over country music and pop and all of those kinds of things that had impact on world culture. Caribbean Song Basin was the facility because that was responsible for a lot of that sound, because Puff Daddy and them were responsible for a lot of that impact. So that facility has been leased out to the Ministry of National Security for over 20-something years now. And a call driven especially by Pedro Molrain, the scientist, a member of the Artists Coalition, is to have that facility returned. At its height, it was one of the 3 top recording studios on planet Earth, right? According to a lot of the international music magazines and those kinds of things, right? There's one of the rooms inside there was one of the top 3 rooms for recording on planet Earth.
right? The bones of that room, those things still exist. So the thing is to symbolically as well as actually is to get a major recording facility that is overseeing that same kind of curatorial process that Amar had put in place, where genius level musicians and product was recorded just like a constant stream being put out and those kinds of things. And that behind that there is the brain trust and all those kinds of things put in place. Remember we talked about a Caribbean touring desk, a Trinidad and Tobago touring desk, creative industries touring desk inside of to be created to look after how to position product internationally and those kinds of things. This hopefully should work in tandem with something that we created called the Susu sessions. The idea of the Susu sessions was that we have a lot of brilliant independent recording studios, recording engineers, rooms, session musicians, and those kinds of things. But everything is scattered hither, there, and yon. It was a way of paying all of those people, producers, engineers, top session musicians, like a living wage, paying them well for a year. And in that period, to go after all the best unrecorded music in Trinidad, in any genre, right? So it's this massive curatorial process where we just listen to all this stuff and that kind of thing and say like, yeah, these songs. And they're producers who are really good at recording rock music, live rock music. There are others who are really good at recording EDM. There are others who are really good at recording live jazz. Others, and getting the best fit for artists to studio, to rooms, to session musicians, so that we bringing the top talent to bear on all the tracks that are produced during this period. And at the end of this, we have an arsenal to attack the international marketplace, right? And with that cadre of music, so the first thing is to get local buy-in, right? So you have your music trucks going around and those kind of things to communities and meet the public and those kinds of things, and the musicians go out and stuff. But one of the main things we'll be looking at is creating seasons of the music, and where music is released and those kinds of things, and perform live. One of the main things we're looking at is to have the graduation, secondary school graduations, becoming major live band touring events for Trinidad and Tobago musicians, so that every single Trinidad and Tobago grad should have live music, right? They have rock bands, jazz bands, R&B bands, Trinidad, soca, everything, chutney bands. All the best live bands should be performing throughout all the secondary school things like that. And then then you start to do those things and you graduate to like when people at the end of the year Christmas parties. So it's not just the parang bands and that kind of stuff, but they let all the businesses, they should be hiring live bands and those kinds of things. We have to go into the municipal codes of all restaurants, bars, and those kinds of things that are on major strips, right? You cannot have a bar or restaurant on the Los Angeles Strip and you don't have live LA musicians performing there. It's not going to happen, right? You will be closed down, and whoever will play the music will take that license and take that spot and that kind of stuff. We can't have spots, whether it be in Tunapuna, Chaguanas, San Fernando, Aripita Avenue, St. James, and those kinds of things, and you don't have live music constantly being pumping through those things and local music being played. So all of these are different kinds of interventions in the music industry. Apart from that, there is, so in case, we don't get Caribbean Sound Basin back, there was a plan to create a studio with Dexter Simmons. Who is Dexter Simmons? Dexter Simmons is a Grammy Award winning engineer producer from Trinidad and Tobago. Who did he produce? An engineer, Michael Jackson, and Outkast, amongst many others, right? He's one of the top producers, engineers in the industry. Dexter wants to come back to Trinidad and work and do stuff. He can set up, in fact, Dexter's intervention in our recording, in terms of how people recorded, he did 2 sets of workshops, one in terms of background vocals and another one in terms of overall recording stuff. Those 2 sessions changed the sound of Trinidad and Tobago music. There was the sound of Trinidad and Tobago music before Dexter Simmons' workshops and then after. That's the power of genius engineering and a communicator. Get Dexter, even if you get Sound Basin or you don't, get Dexter to be the arrowhead of that revamping of the music industry and that kind of stuff, right? Get all that genius music stuff and get that touring company to start to position product, performance product, and product in other spaces. Reintroduce or protecting and monetizing our intellectual property. Now, in the first talk, I spoke about there's a sentence of the 2 sentences spoken directly on the sector about intellectual property. The Minister of Finance talked about intellectual property and whatever. I think that line was taken from our submissions, but it wasn't understood. So now I'm going to talk about what we mean when we say protecting and monetizing intellectual property. Trinidad and Tobago needs a comprehensive, centrally managed campaign to copyright and trademark our local creative works en masse. We're talking about songs, books, folk songs, everything. Toot Moon. Books, music, films, games, all kinds of different kinds of things. Once they're not in the public domain, to get them under trademark and copyrighted protection. And then that same desk or institution then goes after aggressively monetizing all of these things internationally. It may mean working with a series of top licensing institutions and businesses internationally, figure out which ones you can have the best working relationships with. And these are people licensing stuff for brand things, for advertising, for movie placement, placement in sporting centers, in retail outlets, in any types of those kinds of things, monetizing the look and feel of different kinds of things, monetizing fabrics and there are all kinds of ways, all kinds of IP. We have all kinds of IP, intellectual property here, that can be positioned in multiple spaces. We should be looking at, let's say, Trinidad and Tobago is probably, arguably, some people say the 2nd oldest recording industry on planet Earth, right? Calypso music, right? So you're talking about 1912 to the present, right? So older than jazz, older than those kinds of things. So there are a whole set of things that have gone into the public domain. We should be still monetizing those things. We should be the first choice monetizers of those things. But there are others that are on the cusp of going into the public domain. We should be exploiting them right now and stuff. So we should be going after exploiting the golden age calypso music. We should be having an international trust that in the next 5 years, we have hundreds of products and those kinds of things using golden age Trinidad and Tobago calypso as their soundtrack. We position those musics and stuff in films and in all kinds of those kind of things. So the world is vibrating to the sound of golden age Trinidad and Tobago calypso, and we're doing the same for all the different kinds of things. We have certain artists like MX Prime, formerly Maximus Dan, Mark Hardy, Flippo, and those kinds of things, who have been exceptional in terms of getting their stuff positioned in international games, video games, and video and TV and those kinds of things. We need to be going after those things aggressively. It's sources of passive income that we are passing up and sources of foreign exchange. And that, remember, these things could be licensed in territories all over planet Earth, right? There are dozens of territories. The world is split up into multiple territories and those kind of things in Eurasia, Asia, Europe, Latin America, all these different smaller territories and those kinds of things. You should be carving up the world, going after the exploitation of those IPs, patents, all those different kinds of things. On those things, in terms of artists and stuff, patentable material, we need to get technical vocational skills, back into secondary schools. and introduced in funky ways into primary schools. We need to get plumbing, carpentry, TD, technical drawing, all these things back into secondary schools. Not only have they been effective in terms of rehabilitating and keeping delinquents, short-circuiting delinquents and those kinds of things, but they are real sources of income, of income that are sustainable. Even in the most AI economies and stuff, people still going to be needing plumbers and electricians and woodworkers and those kinds of things. We need to get those things, as well as we need to get people into AI, into coding, into those kinds of things. And so all of those things need to be invested into primary and secondary schools. To that, we are suggesting the creation of pilot magnet schools, right? So a magnet school for the arts, a magnet tech vox school, a magnet school for computer science and online and AI technology, and those kinds of things. We need to have schools with immersive curriculums and those kinds of things, and curriculums that are brilliantly created and tailored by specialists and those kinds of things in those forms, in those fields. You might even find that delinquents in schools that you're having right now might be dropping because a lot of those students might be best suited for those kinds of schoolings and those kinds of things. So we are saying reintroduce Tech Vox into the schools and bring the magnet schools and create best practice magnet schools. There were magnet schools in the past, but those weren't real magnet schools. We need proper immersive magnet schools, and we can look after that. And in conclusion, the last big thing that we had was a massive, bold cultural pivot. And it's something that, a gesture which, if done, we have submitted it to the past prime ministers. If it is done, it could transform not just the creative industries in Trinidad and Tobago, but our national brand internationally in one fell swoop. And that is the conversion of the Prime Minister's residence and diplomatic center into the National Museum of Trinidad and Tobago. Now the thing is, none of the Prime Ministers, bar the one who built it, Manning, have really used the Prime Minister's residence in any major way as a residence, right? The diplomatic center is used occasionally for certain things and those kinds of things. So the thing is that it, as a space, it is incredibly underutilized, and I think that a pivot. No, the thing is, let's revert to the National Museum. National museums and major city museums and those kinds of things are amongst the major institutional earners in cities, right? They're major earners of foreign exchange and those kinds of things for cities, right? Because of the amount of traffic that are normally driven into national museums. In those cases, those national museums are properly designed and programmed and constituted. Ours is not, right? It will take you 2 days to walk through the Jamaican National Museum, the National Gallery. It is so rich and incredible that with the amount of different kinds of exhibits and those kinds of things, the content is so superlative. It will take you less than an hour to go through our entire National Museum, right? Now the thing is that I'm saying National Museum, but it's really the National Gallery that should be moved to the Prime Minister's building. So say, okay, a National Museum complex is made up of 3 different parts, right? It's made up of the Museum of Natural History, right? So that deals with the geological history of stuff, and if you have dinosaurs, you have things, soil and different kinds of things, the climate and the plants and animals and those kinds of things. That's one part of a national museum. The other part is of national history thing, which is the movements of people and heroes and the history of the people and those kinds of things. That's another part of a museum complex. And the last part of a museum complex is the National Gallery, which is the work of the creatives, right? The visual arts and sonic work of the creative classes and those kinds of things. Those three things constitute a national museum collection. Some people break up those collections. The Smithsonian breaks up those things into separate things, right? So there's a Museum of Natural History, Smithsonian, there's a next one that looks after the social history and those kinds of things, and there are a number of different galleries and those kinds of things. The British Museum has all of them under one heading. We are saying that the National Museum could keep on to the national history and natural history parts of the stuff where it is right now opposite Memorial Park, and the National Gallery should move to the Prime Minister's residence. Because the thing is that real estate is what drives that, right? We simply do not have a space that can hold our national collection in the Port of Spain, except the Prime Minister's residence. It's the only thing that has the real estate space to be able to house that, and the grounds to be able to house the various things that we do, right? So you're talking about large scale things from national, like costumes and those kinds of things, all the way down to jewelry, to in between massive paintings. So the thing is that you have to visualize the space. A Leroy Clark collection alone could take you about half a day to go through a properly constituted Leroy Clark collection, in the same way like a Jackie Hinkson collection, and those kinds of things. In lieu of not having a National Carnival and Steel Band Museum, a proper Minshell collection, or Carlisle Chang collection, Sastry Maharaj collection. Any one of those things, you're talking about 3-4 hours, just those things. Kenwyn Critchlow, all the great geniuses of the visual arts of Trinidad and Tobago. All of those things we could repatriate. We have the Sherwin Banfield is now the top hip hop sculptor in America. He's a Trinidadian, a young Trinidadian, right? He's you could say the adopted son of the late I don't know how his name flies out of my head all of a sudden, who did the Carlyle's apprentice, who did the Inherent Nobility of Man, which is now at the in the airport, right? But Sherwin's stuff could be brought back here. His sculptures of the notorious B.I.G., LL Cool J, all of those things could be brought back here, and his work and stuff could be seen. So all of these things are possible if you have a space like the. Now, what are the benefits of doing something like that? A prime minister handing over their residence to the National Gallery of the country is international headline news in all international media. It's international news on mainstream New York Times, Washington Post, all of those things, and those kind of Miami Herald, all those things. It is headline news in Vogue magazine, all those kinds of things. It's headline news in art news magazines, and all. It immediately positions the Trinidad and Tobago creative industries and the Trinidad and Tobago brand with all the things we want to sell immediately into international conversation. It immediately places our fine arts catalog into the international conversation. So now we could have conversations with the Met, with the MoMA, with the Smithsonians, with all of the different groups and those kinds of things internationally. We now could have conversations about touring international collections passing through Trinidad and Tobago, and our stuff going internationally and those kinds of things. Forex. This is the big pivot. It immediately brands our society as a society that treats the creative industries and cultural sector as premium. It also puts into context our larger legacy and history, right? So all the Jeffrey Holders and stuff, the fact that Trinidad and Tobago has people who have earned Oscars, Emmys, Grammys, Nobel Prizes, Bollywood Oscars, Tony Awards, you name any international prize and those kinds of things, BAFTAs, etc., etc., etc. Dozens of people knighted, sirs, Trinidad and Tobago, sirs, on those kinds of things on the English side of the Atlantic. We have this incredible history on those kinds of things. And that immediately you have the ability to contextualize all those things with a grand gesture like that, right? So the thing is that I think is the crown jewel of the interventions necessary this year, the national budget and such. So we're seeing again, creative industries in the cultural sector is the comparative advantage of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, especially Trinidad and Tobago. It is the magic fairy dust, dwang dust, Lajables dust, fancy sailor dust that we have that makes us special on planet Earth. It is the seat of what could be an annual $6 billion earning industry for our GDP, Forex earning for our country, right? Right now it earns but 1 point something billion. Most of that is carnival. We're seeing that heritage is 2 billion. Music could be another billion. All of these things, and these are conservative figures that if we can go after in 2 to 3 years if we put in place some of these things that we said there. And when we start to go after attacking and refining all those products and those kinds of things, you're going to have inside of there major hits, major finds, major products and those kinds of things that would be by themselves will be multiple billion earners. Remember, $1 billion is just a couple hundred million US dollars, right? That you can go after with serious hits and serious those kinds of things. We have an opportunity to transform communities, individuals, entire sectors and stuff of the economy, using the creative industries as the engine. So we are calling for this summit with the ministers, the Honorable Prime Minister. We need to close the divide. We need to get serious. We need to unlock and unleash this economy. You'll need to get an idea of how it really works. And this is just me talking here towards you here, but it's not like a hardcore PowerPoint with film and music and bells and whistles and stuff. This is me just raw telling it to you to camera. But the time has come for a more sophisticated approach to industrial development as a whole, but to the creative industries and the cultural sector in particular. We can be serious economic drivers to the economy. And the people who are going to be that are not the people who you think. It's none of the glamour girls and glamour boys and the favorites and those kind of things are not the people, right? Just like hip hop, there's a whole set of guys who look like URP workers and that kind of stuff who are multi-billion-dollar earners and those kinds of things. In the same way, it's going to be a whole set of black and brown people, all kinds of people of all shades and sizes and colors and from all different classes and those kinds of things who are going to be responsible for this, who you cannot predict, right? So please listen to the things that we've said, take them in, understand what we're saying. We are at a moment of vast oceanic global instability, right? Right here in our region, we are looking at it right now. There are things that could happen tomorrow that could change everything about life as we know it. We have the power to innovate and to empower our citizens and to diversify this economy, expand our footprint on planet Earth, to deepen our knowledge of ourselves and to become more ourselves, and in becoming more ourselves, become rich. Rich not only monetarily, but rich in terms of the life lived. We have to fulfill our destiny as people who can change planet Earth because of our understanding of freedom and of our understanding of joy, and because we are the ones who own the industries of joy. We are the heart of the global civilization of joy, and it's time that we act on it and monetize it for our own benefits. Thank you very much. Ruby Diri Victor, President of ACT Multimedia Artists, saying over and out. See you all soon.